Okay, let's talk about the partner's tale. That's next. So the genre is sermon. The part of the genre emphasized is called exemplum in the Middle Ages. We would call it a sermon illustration. If you've ever heard a sermon, and it's a decent sermon, there's usually a thesis, and we're going to see what his thesis is. But there's almost always, along with the moral instruction, a story to illustrate what the preacher is trying to say. This is called a sermon illustration. Here in our class, we might call that application. That, remember the third level of Bloom's taxonomy that we covered? It would be a story, an example, and the word exemplum is just the medieval word for example, the Latin word. It is crystallizing in your head what is being said by some sort of story. The theme or the thesis is Radex Malorum est Cupiditas, which is greed is the root of all evils, or lots of evils. You'll remember that the Chaucer, the narrator, had said of the partner that I believe he's either a gelding or a mare, that he seems to be, perhaps, he could be heterosexual, but if the narrator's suppositions are right, he could be a eunuch or gay, that he is a con artist, he carries around fake relics, pig bones in a jar. He said to the wife of Bath, I was thinking about quitting all this and getting married. So on the one hand, he seems to perhaps be a gay or eunuch guy. On the other hand, he seems to be saying, I'm a heterosexual, I'm thinking about getting married. And then he said, teach us young men of your practice, because we fell off the turnip truck yesterday. We're new to the world. He is not new to the world. He dresses like a young person, but he has got to be in his 40s, maybe. So he is definitely not a young person. So he may be someone who is older, pretending to be young. He may be someone who is pretending to be a ladies' man, when in fact, he doesn't like ladies. So we're not sure where he stands at the beginning of the story. After the clerk tells his tale, we don't read the clerk's tale, the host began to swear as if he were crazy and said, by the nails and the blood of Christ, that was an evil judge. So there's an evil judge in the pardon me, not the clerk's tale, dang it, the physician's tale. It says that was an evil judge by the nails and the blood of Christ. And by the nails and the blood of Christ is a very nasty curse. So you got to think of the nails that pierced Jesus's hands, and by the bloods that came out of it, that's a pretty strong curse. So remember this curse later in the story. So the host turns to the partner and says, Sir partner, you traveling preacher, you well-respected pastor, tell us some mirth or japes right away. So he says, hey, tell us a fableau. Tell us a dirty story. Do you normally go to a pastor and say, tell us a dirty joke? What might the host be thinking about the moral character of the parson if he's asking him to tell a dirty story? Are you guys there at all?
He probably wouldn't be thinking of his character if he asked him to tell that type of story.
Right. So if I said about a televangelist, hey, we're in private now, tell us the dirtiest thing you know, I'm assuming that he's just a televangelist for the money and he's really a scumbag. So by asking the partner to tell a dirty story, he's insulting the partner. Notice the partner's response. I got one. So as low as the host thinks he is, the partner is actually that low. He's got a dirty story, and he'll tell you. Well, immediately, line 323, the noble, the honorable people of the group began to shout, "Don't let him tell us something dirty. Make him tell us something moral that we may learn." And I don't think they necessarily object to another dirty story because they've heard, what, 7 of them at this point? But it's that this pastor would tell them a dirty story. Nobody wants to be driving down the street and see their pastor or priest going into a strip club or a porn palace, right? We want our moral examples to remain moral, to inspire us and not to demoralize us by wicked actions. And so they all say, "We don't want to hear something immoral from you." And he goes, "Okay, I'll tell you something moral. But first, to think of something moral, I need a good hit of my Jack Daniels. A little bit of alcohol will help." Something moral, huh? Moral. Huh. So this guy's job is to tell moral stories for a living. When they say, "Tell us a dirty story," he goes, "I got one." But when they say, "Tell us something moral," he has to drink some alcohol and think about it. The point is, his mind is as degraded as the host thinks it is. So he begins his prologue. "Ladies and gentlemen, when I preach, I ring it out like a bell. And my theme is always the same: Radix malorum est cupiditas. The root of evils is greed." He says, "I've created fake relics. I found a sheep bone, a shoulder bone of a sheep, and I say, this is the very sheep, my brothers and sisters, that Jacob or David in his holiness used to preside over as shepherd, and holiness flowing through him flowed into these sheep. Hallelujah. And these are holy bones." Right? So that's his shtick, is selling relics that aren't relics, or selling, oil taken from these or liquid taken from these fake relics. And also remember, he does indulgences. That's where you pay money so your sins will be forgiven. They don't do that anymore in the Catholic Church. That was a medieval, pardon me. It was a medieval corruption of their theology that they permitted in the Middle Ages, and then they stopped later. So he says, "I preach great sermons, but I don't preach, my intention isn't to help them be free of their sins. My intention is to get money off the idiots. Because once I preach my sermons, if they give me money, I don't care if when they die, their souls fry in hell. I don't care where their souls go." He literally says, "I don't care if their souls go picking blackberries. I don't care where their souls go. I just want to strip the idiot hayseed rubes of their money. I want to con them." Mwahaha, mwahaha. Now, why does he preach on greed? Weirdly enough, my other job that I do, in addition to English professor, is I'm a pastor of a mega church here in town, and I do quite a bit of preaching here and in Wales. And one of the problems with preaching is every now and then you're going to preach on a topic that is a weakness, your own spiritual weakness. And I'm always uncomfortable preaching on my own weaknesses, because really I have one or two choices. One, I can admit it's a weakness, and that's uncomfortable for everyone. Or I cannot admit it, and then implicitly I'm being a hypocrite. by telling everyone to do something when I myself screwed up myself. Does that make sense? So why in the world would the pardoner whose sin, the heart of his idolatry, his main sin is greed, why would he preach of all things on greed? Well, he tells us, because that is how he gets his money. He has preached on all kinds of things and then passed the plate, and he finds that when he preaches on greed, he gets more money back. And I think you can see why. If I say, pride is your sin, is your pride sin? If it is sin, give me money. Well, you may not. But if I say, greed is your sin, do you worship the almighty dollar more than God Almighty? Show the people around you, show God that you do not worship the almighty dollar. Put that dollar in the plate, my brothers and sisters. Be free, right? You might be more likely to throw a little something in, if nothing else, just to show people how righteous you are. And that is why he preaches on greed, is because that's how he makes his most money. So that's what he preaches on every time. And then he admits all kinds of other sins. He says, I'm not going to try to live like the apostles. I'm going to have my money. I'm going to have all the wool that I want for nice clothes. I'm going to have my cheese and my wheat. I don't care if the poorest little boy is dying of starvation. I'm going to get that money from his mama because that's how I roll. I don't care if the children starve to death. I'm getting the money. And he says, and I'm going to drink liquor on the vine. By the way, I think 3 times during this story, he stops in front of them and he drinks liquor. When he's preaching against drinking, he is drinking liquor. When he's preaching against gluttony, twice he stops to eat in front of them to demonstrate his sinfulness. And he says, last line here, I have a jolly wench in every town. Every town I go to, I ride this circuit and I preach these towns. Every town I go to, there's a hot, lusty babe I jump in bed with in service. Every town I got a hot babe, because that is how crazy heterosexual I am, making love to female women, girls. So is he a heterosexual, or is he kind of covering up here for some sexual, in medieval terms, inadequacy, for being a eunuch, and maybe in medieval terms being a sinner, because in the Middle Ages homosexuality was considered by the Catholic Church a great sin. He says, now here's a paradox. Most people, when you hear a good sermon, you assume it's because they are striving to be close to God and the Holy Spirit is inspiring them, and they are preaching a great sermon because they're trying to be a holy pastor. He goes, here's a paradox. I preach great sermons and I know that I'm a filthy scumbag sinner. Deal with that. Boom. So he seems to be going out of his way to ridicule the Christians, to make them feel uncomfortable in their faith, to undermine their faith by sinning in front of them while preaching on drinking and so on. So the tale proper begins. Once a time in Flanders. Flanders, of course, is over in what we would call the Netherlands. I think now it's between Netherlands and Belgium, I think. No, I think it's in the Netherlands. So it's in the lowlands, just sort of opposite of England, across the channel, a little bit away from France. So in Flanders was a bunch of young guys that were just straight up drunken sinners, these 3 guys. And they were drinkers, and then he preaches against drinking while he's drinking. They were gluttons. He preaches against gluttony while he's being a glutton. They gambled, and they cussed. Now, remember the curse the host had uttered before? while he's preaching, he says, "Did you know, my brothers and sisters?" Remember, he has a really high-pitched voice, and he bleats like a goat when he preaches. He says, "Did you know that some people are so disgusting and lowly? They're such raging sinners that when they cuss, they actually say this hideous phrase. They say, 'By the nails and the blood of Christ.' Have you ever heard of such outrageous cursing and darkness?" And of course, the host had said, "By the nails and the blood of Christ." So you got to imagine him going over to the host while he's preaching and saying, "Have you ever heard of such sinfulness?" So he is poking the host. He's mocking the host. He's bringing out the host as a symbol of sinfulness in front of the other Canterbury pilgrims. Why is he doing it? Does he mean it? Is it a joke? We don't know. But he's going to do it one more time, and that's a mistake because the host is going to strike back. So the story is these three barroom buddies called rioters are drinking together as usual when they hear a bell ringing, one that is rung in front of a funeral procession. One of the three rioters asks his boy servant to go check who died. The boy already knows, so he reports that it was the three rioters' drinking buddy, a fourth one of them, who went home, was drinking on a bench, and just dropped dead right there. Now, he says specifically why he dropped dead, that a secret thief named Death sneaked in and took him. And this guy named Death has killed 1,000 lately in this pestilence. This seems to be a reference to the Black Death. And then the bartender says, "You know, there's just a village about a half a mile from here, and Death has come and taken every man, woman, and child. There's no one left." And so these three drunken guys decide to take a trough together. Remember what we said a trough is? It's a vow. And their trough is they together will be like one, and they're going to go and find Death, and they're going to kill him. So they plight their troth to live and die each for the other. Now that's an irony alert. They will turn out to fulfill that troth to live and die each for the other. Now we might say, how in the world can you kill death? Because death is merely a process. But I want you to think about death as they sometimes did in the Middle Ages, and we sometimes still do. Anybody ever see Bill and Ted? Remember the character Death? There's a character Death in general culture. He wears a black robe and he has a scythe. He's got a skeleton face. In old rock and roll albums, he rides a Harley. You know what I mean? That guy. So imagine that there is an embodiment of death, and they're going to go try to kill him. That's what they're thinking, that there is an actual reaper. Now, in what way might these guys be morally qualified to kill death? Has anyone in Western civilization been said to have killed death so that death will be no more? Anybody ever heard of such a character?
That's Jesus.
His name is Jesus. That's why people, when they die as Christians, purportedly go to heaven. It's because Jesus defeated death. So the reason that Jesus defeated death, Jesus is a lot like a little child speaking sometimes. You know, there's that purity and sweetness. So sometimes when I talk about Jesus, you'll hear the voice of a little child. Actually, I have no idea what the little child just was. I'm just making this up as I go. And no one smiled at all except God bless you, Sydney. So
that was very funny.
Thank you. I'm working it here. I'm trying.
We're smiling.
We're smiling.
Under the mask. My wife, when I do something funny, never cracks a smile. There's times she doesn't, and I'll say, "That was funny." She goes, "I'm smiling on the inside." Well, that does me a little good. I say, "Why don't you tell the jokes on the inside?" And she would probably say, "Yes, please." So there we go. You got to imagine these guys are going to go kill death, which shows their spiritual ignorance, because Jesus already is thought to have killed death. Why? Because he was absolutely perfect in his sinlessness. And his death, according to Christians, because of his absolute godlike purity, enabled him to take the bullet for death instead of the rest of humanity. And anybody who believes in him would become a Christian and not go to hell when they die, or purgatory. They go to heaven. So what's interesting is these guys don't know that. And so ironically, they jump up in a drunken rage and they're going toward that village to confront death. And as they go, they immediately rip Jesus Christ's flesh anew. They tear him a new one by their cursing. So the irony is, they know not whom they curse. They're going to kill death, and they happen to curse the one who killed death. Does that make sense? So remember, this is a sermon. It's going to have references to Christian illusion. So that is an irony alert. So right away, they meet an old man, a poor old man. And what we find out about this old man is he grows older, but he can't die. He longs for death. He wanders the world. He wants to exchange his old age for youth. He sends 3 men down the crooked path. He sends them under a tree, and he gives them a powerful Christian blessing as they depart. Now, people from Chaucer's day to our day have been trying to crack the code of who this old man is. And they try to answer all 7 of these problems. And you can do this too for your paper. A lot of students do. The problem is all the prime candidates don't fulfill all 7. So for example, they say, we want to know where death is. And he sends them down a crooked path. Now, why is that relevant? Jesus, when he was preaching a Sermon on the Mount, he said there's 2 ways to go in this life. You can take the wide open pathway that's broad and crooked, and it goes straight down to hell. And that's the way almost everyone takes. They all just take the popular path, and it's going to lead them to hell. Or you can take the narrow path that is hard to find, and it goes straight up. And that is the way to salvation and the good life in this world. So by sending them down the crooked path, that would be like us saying, oh yes, go to that hotel on the top of the hill. It's called the Bates Motel. You'll love it. Ask for Norman. Enjoy your shower. Anybody get the reference there?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the reader is going, no! And these guys are going, okay, down the crooked path, because they're stupid spiritually. He sends them under a tree. What is a famous, horrifying tree in the Bible? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't go to that tree. It's the tree of death. If you eat of it, you will die, Adam and Eve, and you will curse all humanity. Okay, we'll go look under a tree. So, what are the major candidates? Well, one is the wandering Jew. This isn't in the Bible, but in medieval folklore, there was this notion that during the time of Jesus, as he was walking to be crucified, carrying his cross through the streets of Jerusalem in what's called the Via Dolorosa. By the way, I've walked the Via Dolorosa streets in Jerusalem. I haven't been there 3 times like the wife of Bath, but I've been there once. But while he was carrying the crossbeam of his cross to be crucified, he stumbles, and a Jew walks up to him and curses him out and says, you go die, you loser. And Jesus looks up at him and says, you will not die until I return. And so Jesus is crucified. He rises to heaven. One day he will return. and the Jew keeps living. And he becomes a Christian because he realizes after, I don't know, a few hundred years that this Jesus had something going for him. So he's become a Christian, but he just kind of wanders the world running out the clock, waiting for Jesus to return, because that is the curse placed upon him by Christ, according to folklore, medieval folklore. Well, how does that fit here?
Boxes 1, 3.
Molly? Go ahead. How does that fit? Which of these 7 does it fit?
1 through 3 for sure.
Okay, grows older but cannot die, longs for death, and wanders the world, thus wandering Jew. Perfect. Does the wandering Jew want to exchange his old age for youth? Because this old man says, I keep going up to people and say, trade me your youth and you'll get my age and I'll get your youth, and he gets no takers. Is there any indication the wandering Jew has that power in the story? No. Why would the wandering Jew who's a Christian send the men down a crooked path under a tree to their damnation? But he might give them a powerful Christian blessing as they depart, hoping that they're saved. So it fulfills 1, 2, 3, and 7, but not 4, 5, and 6. So we see why he's attractive, but he doesn't quite nail it. The next is the pardoner himself, that the old man is an image or a symbol of the pardoner. Can the pardoner grow older but not die? No, he can die. Now, he does want to be young, he pretends to be young, so maybe that's it. Does the pardoner long for death? No. Although he says, money is death, give me your money, so he does seem to have a death wish for money. Does he wander the world? Yes and no. He wanders a district in England, but he wanders. Does he want to exchange old age for youth? Well, metaphorically. Might he send 3 people down the crooked path under a tree? Yes, he doesn't care if people die and go to hell. Might he give them a powerful Christian blessing as they depart? Yes, because he's a preacher. So 4, 5, 6, 7, yes, maybe 3, not 2, maybe not 1. The Apostle Paul, I know we're a little late. I'm just going to finish this section. Actually, we're not late yet. The Apostle Paul, in one of his epistles, refers to what he calls the old man or the old self or the old nature, and that is the Christian idea of original sin, which some people call the second death. So if you research this, you'll see some writers talking about original sin, some talking about the second death. But really what it is Christians hold this doctrine that everybody who's born is born into a sinful state where they're separated from God. And they choose to do sinful things, which separate them from a perfect God. And in that state, all that's going to happen is we're going to make bad life choices. Our lives are going to be encumbered by sin and addictions. And when we die, we go to hell. So that's the idea of original sin. So, does original sin grow older but cannot die? Okay. Does original sin long for death? No, it likes being sinful. Does it wander the world? You could say sin is restless and it wanders. Does it want to exchange old age for youth? Does it want to be born again? No. Might it send 3 men down the crooked path? Might it send them under a tree? Yes. Would death would the sinful nature give a powerful Christian blessing to them as they depart? No. So none of these fit. And then a fourth one might be death. So many times a fourth one is death. But death doesn't grow older. It cannot die. Does death long for death? No. That doesn't make sense. Does it wander the world? Fair enough. Does death want to be younger? No. Might it send 3 men down the crooked path under a tree to their destruction? Yes. But would death give them a powerful Christian blessing, hoping they become Christians and are born again? No. So all 4 of the major candidates don't work. They do, but they don't. So what you could do for your paper, if you wanted to, a lot of students do this every semester. You could pick one of these candidates and argue against the other 3. You could say, I think it's the Wandering Jew, and I'm going to argue why he's a better candidate than the others. Or you could pick a 5th candidate that's not on this chart and argue against these 4. And a lot of students do that, and it's awesome, especially if you have several students doing it at the same time. It is really beneficial because you can share arguments and sources. Okay, we will finish that next time. We're almost done with that tale.